forward. Oh, someone beat me to it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to run through the deck. And I'll have a little backup support from some of the staff members here who are helping out. So get ready, and can someone give me a thumbs up that you're looking at a slide deck right now? All right. So let's click present. So that's the only thing you get to look at. All right. Thank you all so very much again for coming. This is the first of 2 town halls. Usually we do it during the week and then a follow-up on Saturday. But this time we flip-flopped the order and thought we'd do one on a Saturday first and then do another one in the evenings on Tuesday. So again, if you know anybody who can't attend today, they can always call in March 9th in the evening. I think it's at 6 or 6:30, but we'll put it all over social media so you can't miss it. There's a couple of slides in the beginning that are critically important, so that's why it says required in bright red up at the top that we need to tick off before we move through. So as we talked about last time when we all met, we talked about we're in data gathering mode right now. We're trying to find out who can come back, who wants to come back into the building, who can come back into the building, who's interested in doing that. So we sent out a form last week to all of our families via email. Most of our families, a good number of them have filled it out, but there's still a few we haven't heard from. Our goal is to hear from every single student's family, so we make sure that we don't lose anybody. So please, 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 if you haven't done the survey yet or done the choose a schedule form yet, please do it. It's in English and in Spanish. Next required slide, immunization compliance. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about this later when we talk about how things are going here. But for any in-person school program, students have to be up to date with their state required vaccinations and have their universal health certificate at least within the last year on file at the school before they're allowed back in. But those regulations are the same, whether you're in person or you're sort of an in-person remote stature or whatever it is. Those are state level laws that we have to follow. So, but I do want to note at the bottom of this slide, a COVID-19 vaccination is not required for students to come back into the building. In fact, it hasn't been approved for students or for the general population yet for children under the age of 17, only 17 and up. And if you're 17, you have to have medical conditions. So once that approval comes down, perhaps city officials and education officials may require it, but right now, no one's saying one way or the other if they will. So suggested reading. We always like to share a lot of information with you and to make sure you understand all of the thinking that we're putting into this. So we have developed a guide to at-school learning. So as we're asking you whether or not to come back, so you can make an informed decision, you can read this guide and understand all the health and safety protocols, what the school day might look like, also checklists of all the things that you need to have in place in order to come back into the building. And again, that's in English and Spanish, and there's the links there. We can certainly make those available to anybody who wants to look at them. And I believe they're also on our website. This is the big news. This is what gets me through the day. We are optimistic. I used to say cautiously optimistic, but I've moved into full optimistic mode here. That by next fall, when school comes back in session, we are very hopeful that all staff and students can return to the building for in-person learning. We are planning towards that. We're building our budget around that. We're building our staffing around that. Given that the vaccination rates are going through the roof at this point, we did over 2 million as a country yesterday, that more and more vaccinations are being approved, that there's partnerships with competitors to help produce vaccinations are all really positive signs that we're going to get to that herd immunity even sooner than we were originally predicting, which was the end of summer. We're now thinking early midsummer. Certainly, President Biden has made a commitment that by the end of May, anybody who wants a vaccination should be able to get one. So we're pretty excited about that. Public health metrics are actually starting to trend in DC, not everywhere, but in DC and the surrounding area in a pretty good direction. They're not great, but they have plateaued. We've gotten through the holiday surge, and it looks like we're starting to trend down. We are not by any stretch down to a sort of low level. And certainly we are still above where we were last spring when we closed down, but they are trending in the right direction. We are obviously encouraging everybody to get your tests, to make sure we get the best data, to get your vaccination, et cetera. However, I hate to have to say this, but always, as we best laid plans, right? We make plans and then something happens, a variant pops up, or there's the holiday surge, or Texas decides to be anti-masking and someone goes to Texas. So the one thing that is constant in this world is that change is that constant. So just acknowledge that. We are super excited to bring our students back, but we will continue to be ready to adapt. And we just want to remind you that that is part of what we're doing. Just a beautiful set of pictures here of what it looks like. You can see our kids. We brought back families of kids who are struggling. There's social distancing, everybody's masked up. There's some of our beautiful staff. They are all smiling. You can kind of see it in their eyes with the corners. You can see the students are working on their devices over here. The devices are here at the school, so they're not going back and forth, which is great, helps avoid the spread of germs. You see this little box here? That's a box of school supplies that the students given at the beginning of the day, which also helps mitigate the spread of germs. So we're not bringing books back and forth, manipulate back and forth, pens and paper and all that good stuff. So it's really exciting. We're so happy to have everybody, or not everybody, but some people back with the prospect of bringing more and more back. Let's talk a little bit about what we did this last week. So what we're calling Creative Care began March 1st, and how is it going? And you've got a lot of staff on the call here. So if anybody wants to say or drop in the chat some observations of how it went, please feel free, or they can answer questions as we go. But all in all, it's going really, really well. We have daily reflections as a team where we sit and we say, all right, what worked, what didn't work? How did the kids do? Did the bathroom breaks work appropriately? Is there anything we didn't think about? That kind of constant revisiting is allowing us to make refinements in such a way that it's going smoother and smoother. Our students, this is one thing that's just been so beautiful, that some of that joyful noise is back in the building. Students are excited to be in the building again. I have the privilege of sitting over the path to the playground. So I get to watch the kids go out the back door and walk to the playground, and they're 6 feet apart in line, but they're laughing and they're excited and they're with their teachers. One really great innovation that has made this go very well has been our in-house developed CMI screening app. You can go into any of the app stores, no matter what kind of phone you have, and download it for free. And basically it asks you all those COVID questions. And once you go through, you bring your child up, you show us a green screen. We don't have to ask questions, we have to take temperature. Your child is welcome to come into the building, or you can come into the building. Not only is the screening app working for students, but we also do it for staff every single day, just so you know. Students are attending classes remotely. What that means is we are still using the virtual programming or the remote programming, but the kids are accessing it in school at their desk with teachers supporting them to help them access it. And the other really beautiful surprise we've seen, which was a huge concern through both our staff, but also all the city leadership, was will students be able to adapt? Will they keep their masks on? Will we spend all day chasing them around, telling them to put their masks on, or to stay apart from their friends, or to wait to go to the bathroom when it's bathroom break? They're actually doing great. They're following the protocols. They show up, they know what room they're supposed to go to. They make sure their mask is over their nose. They remind their parents to show the green screen on the CMI screener. So we're really excited. As always, our kids are resilient, they're adaptable, they're doing great. And as I mentioned and showed you in that picture, students are getting individual student supply boxes. Again, that helps limit the spread of germs. That's collected at the end of the day, disinfected. So when they show up, it's hopefully germ-free. And we're not exposing families if they've been exposed here at the school, and vice versa. We're not bringing germs into the school. So that seems to be going really well too. Every time we've had a town hall, and even from the very beginning when we went into this remote learning posture last March, we talked about our non-negotiables, and those are the same. They're still very relevant today. Number one is health and safety. Number two is transparency, letting you know what our thinking is, letting you know when we don't know the facts. But when we get the facts, making sure we share them. letting you know what our analysis is and how we're moving forward, answering whatever questions you all have. We're going to continue that throughout this process. Number 3, and it's highlighted here because that's really what the deep dive is happening over the fall and now, is meeting the needs of our students, really understanding what's working, what's not working, what things the school can do to adapt, how to invite students back, that kind of thing. That's critically important now. They're all important, but that one right now is kind of the main focus. And we mentioned this at the beginning, and part of this is number 4, early childhood is not an automatic priority. For a lot of schools, it has been, because they feel like the little ones can't do virtual learning. What we found is our little ones are doing a pretty good job. It's a credit to our ECE and K teachers. They're really doing a great job keeping it engaging and doing the best they can, but also sort of respecting, students' limitations and families' limitations. So it's not an automatic priority for us, unlike a lot of other schools where they say that's the first group they're going to bring back no matter what. Number 5, we started small. As we talked about in our last town hall and in the fall, no more than 50 were going to be invited back for the first round, the sort of phase 1 that we're in right now. And I think that was the right choice to make, because it's given us a chance to see how kids react in this situation, to meet the deepest needs of the kids who have the greatest needs, and to get staff back into the building in a phased fashion, in a safe fashion, and build confidence in our protocols, build confidence in our education system again for everybody. That's everybody in our community. And 6, this is obviously important. Data and science are driving our decisions, not political pressure. You've seen there's a lot of political pressure to do things that may not be the best thing in the pandemic. There was a lot of pressure put on schools in the early fall. A lot of schools opened and ended up having to close back down because they bowed to that pressure and they didn't follow the data, they didn't follow the science. So a credit to my team, who have really kept us, our feet to the fire when it comes to focusing on data and science. Part of that data is knowing our students and knowing them deeply. That's more than just assessment, that is teacher insights. The teachers have been in the same situation with these students and seeing how it's working for particular students. So we're tapping into them because they're an amazing resource of data. So we're looking at students with IEPs, students with 504 plans. Many of these students are ones who need additional support, whether they're in person or virtually. And we're finding that to be true virtually too. So they're receiving some priority analysis. Same thing with our English language learners. It's been difficult for some of them to access the virtual content because it's presented in English. Or they're having to translate for their family or for their other siblings. And so we've observed that there's some additional struggles for English language learners. Students of essential workers. This is also an important subgroup that we're trying to understand and look at, where remote learning can be very challenging for these families. If the caregivers are out of the house because if they don't work, they don't get paid, or they're in a job that requires them to be out of the house, medical service, safety service, government, teaching, whatever it might be, leaving the kids home to try to manage their own learning together has been challenging for some of those families. And then there's that group of students that we wanted to come back in the first creative care phase, but who were unable to, whether it was due to vaccinations or weren't interested or weren't ready and didn't have the confidence level. I think they're going to get some priority too. We're going to reach back out to them. Defining student need. That was the one that was highlighted in our non-negotiables. Assessment data. We've taken some assessments. We're doing normative assessments, some summative assessments. We're trying to understand what our kids are learning, what they're not learning, what's going well, what's not. Iep Progress Monitoring. Each IEP, individual education plan for students who need special education services. They have goals in their plan. So we're monitoring progress towards those goals, or if there's been regression towards those goals. And that's required a very deep dive look too. Even more so, I think, than now in this situation than when we're in person, we see them every day. Attendance in remote classes is a very big factor. We have some kids who have missed a lot of classes for some of the reasons we talked about before, whether it's essential worker, language, bad internet connection, whatever it might be. So attendance is a big driving factor too. We have some kids who go to every single enrichment class, but then don't go to their math classes because math is harder or it's not as much fun or whatever. So we're even getting onto that nuance. Participation, engagement in class discussions. This is where those teacher observations and our TA observations are critical. Are the kids there? Are they participating? We all have Zoom fatigue, so we're trying to make it interesting, but to what extent are kids totally dialed out? Completion of assignments is obviously a part of our assessment data, but if a kid's in class but not doing any of the work, they may not understand the work, they may not be accessing it, so we want to understand what's going on there too. Learning environment, do they have a quiet space at home to do it? A lot of our middle school students care for younger siblings because their parents are essential workers. So that might be a group that needs to come back so they don't have to be the caregiver and they can be a student again. Whether parents and guardians are essential workers, we talked about, and something that's been laid very bare throughout this pandemic is internet connection and the socioeconomic impact of that. A lot of families don't have reliable internet connection. We've given out hotspots. We've given out a ton of hotspots. Every school has, but there's still issues. It's just a massive citywide equity issue that I know our city leaders are talking about, but as a school, we're looking at it to consider who should be coming back. So the choose a schedule form, when we went over those critical slides, the must-do slides, the red ones, the first ones, the choose a schedule form. Here's what the data is telling us right now. As of March 5th, yesterday at 1 p.m., here's what we've heard. Our completion rate's pretty high, almost 78%. That's fantastic. I need it to be 100%. So again, if any of you on this call haven't done it, please, please do it today. We want to know what your choices are. Our lower schools had a higher completion rate than our middle school. That's not entirely surprising because what you find is, and this is natural and normal, you want your middle schoolers to be more independent, to manage their learning more and all that. So they may be checking the emails, they may be checking Seesaw instead of the families. So it's not surprising our family response rate's a little bit lower there. That's sort of just a natural trend we've seen across the city. So what I envision we're going to be doing when we come back in session on Monday is we're going to start reaching out to all those families we haven't heard from. And you see our middle school is going to have to be a focus of that. There were 3 options in that choose an option form or choose a schedule form. You can sort of see where it broke down. We do have a fair number of people who are choosing to stay remote. These numbers pretty much reflect what other city surveys have shown us, that our older students are less likely to opt to come in person. It's very complicated for a school to figure out how to do that, but also I think they're more likely to take public transportation to school. The participation rates in in-person schooling in the city has been varied wildly by ward and by the demographics of the ward. So those numbers aren't altogether surprising, but you can see we need to be reaching out and building confidence for that target audience as well. Option 2, in-person only with my child's teacher. What that means is it's kind of looking a lot like normal school. And you can see about 1/3 of folks want that, and that's the only way they're comfortable bringing their child back into the building. And then the last option is I want my child in the building, whether it's virtual learning or remote learning, but they're in person, they're getting the socio-emotional experience, they're being supported by teachers, but they're still in the virtual platform. And you can see that broke down by about 1/3. But again, I want these numbers to all hit 100%, please. So expanded at school learning, the selection process. So how do we decide who comes back into school? We've talked a lot about this, but I think it's really important to highlight, and I suspect you'll have questions around this too. As we talked about back in the fall, we did a deep data dive into every student in the building, or I'm sorry, every student on our roster, not in the building, unfortunately. And we created basically a first priority list of about 50 kids where we felt like they had to be back in school because it just was not working for them. And we talked about all the factors there. Not all those kids are here right now for vaccination reasons, for lack of confidence reasons, whatever it might be. So those folks are some we're looking at to create first priority. We'll reach out again. Again, we don't want to lose anybody. Second priority are those students that need additional support, but we couldn't accommodate in that first phase 1 batch, the 50 that we thought we could accommodate. So we have a list. Again, we have over 100 kids on the list. They're broken down by sort of levels of need based on all that data we talked about a minute ago. And so we've got some that weren't like the neediest, but might be close. We want to look to that group next to get them. Again, it's all about leveling the playing field and doing what's equitable. Next step, do we, and this is critically important, and this is sort of the rate limiting factor for all schools, do we have building space based on the COVID regulations, social distancing, all that? Do we have teaching staff who are able to come in and accommodate all the students whose families requested a spot? This is sort of the magic. This is both the art and the science of this. We need to figure out, and that's what we're doing this week, figuring out who wants to be back in the building, staff-wise, student-wise, and how does that line up? So after we run through these priority groups that we talked about, if we can't accommodate every single family that said, I want an in-person slot, we're gonna have to run a lottery. And that's very likely we'll get there, given sort of the number of staff that are back in the building or willing to come back right now or going forward. But we do anticipate as more staff grow in confidence and get vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and their children are able to go back to school, they're going to be able to come back into school now and be here instead of being forced to be virtual. We expect to have more seats open up, and we will keep you posted as that happens and as we continue to do that, what I'm sort of calling rolling admissions. Selection process. It's about logistics at this point, folks. Yes, we have staff members who are excited about coming in. We have staff members who are teaching their virtual lessons from the building. Their safety is our top priority. Anybody who's in our community and our staff, we want them to be safe in their place of work. We don't want to increase risk by them forcing them to come back to work. We have not asked anybody, we've never said you come back or you take leave. That's just not who CMI is. That's not how we take care of our community, unlike a lot of other school systems have done that. We also value the concerns of our staff members who prefer to remain remote. We have told them if you have a family situation or a health situation where it is not safe for you to come back into the building, we will respect that. And we are working with our staff individually to understand their individual circumstances to see when they might be able to come back into the building. So the same way we're doing a student deep data dive, we're doing it with our staff too. We're trying to build that momentum. Building space obviously is a big one. That's dependent on the CDC regulations. Right now, it still requires no more than 12 people in a room at any given time, 6 feet of separation at any given time, full masking, your ages 2 up at all times unless you're eating or drinking, obviously. So we are following those regulations like we have to. So what that means is our maximum class size can only be 10 students with 2 teaching staff. No more than 12 people are allowed in a room together at this point. They will make accommodations if we have a short-term push-in, but we have to track that. So if a related service provider needs to come in and work with a student in class, they can come in for that short amount of time and then they can exit out. But right now, those are our limitations, which means, in a building that could accommodate 600 kids, we're more likely to accommodate about half of that at any given time under these social distancing regulations. And we can work through the actual real numbers, but that's about where we're going to land. Couple reminders here before we talk a little bit about what in-person learning looks like and will look like. We just want you to remember that if you opt for virtual now, you're going to be virtual for the rest of the school year for your families, for your students. That's fine. We're going to keep the high quality virtual programming. We're constantly looking at that every Wednesday during professional development. Professional development to make sure it gets better and better and better. So that will be in place through the rest of the school year. So if your family circumstances are such, you're not comfortable in coming back into the building, you will have that option. Students at school schedule may be forced to return to remote learning, both because of what's happening in the pandemic, right? If we have a weird outbreak or a surge, one of these variances takes off, we may have to switch back to virtual. But also, if your circumstances change at home, if for whatever reason your comfort level decreases, you can always opt back into all remote. So we're not going to force anybody to stay in a building if they don't feel safe. That's what that means. And this is the good news. When I use words like momentum, I think is the best word to sort of describe what we're trying to build and build confidence. March 29th, that Monday, that's when phase 2 is going to start. That's when we're going to add more students to the current students we have here in phase 1. And over that time between March 29th and April and into May, more of our teachers are going to get vaccinations. I anticipate the numbers and the spread rate are all going to continue to come down. We're going to continue to do our Sentinel testing to make sure folks are safe in-house. We expect the possibility of having more students being able to return to an in-person platform. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nyamka because I need to take a drink of water and I feel like I've been talking a long time, but also because she and her team have really designed a beautiful schedule and been able to coordinate the virtual and the in-person really well. So I'd love for her to talk a little bit about that, and then she can kick it back over to me when she's ready.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to dive into what the day looks like at school. We really have found that our program currently is working for so many, and we really want to keep that intact as much as possible. So thinking about what that at school learning looks like when they come into the building, we want to keep that schedule that we've had throughout the whole school year. So for preschool through fourth grade, their hours are going to be from 9 to 2:30. And then fifth through eighth, it will be 9 to 2:45. And that's consistent with what they have been doing throughout the school year. Next slide, please. And so just wanted to highlight some of the similarities and differences between the at school and at home learning. So one big similarity we want to right now what we're focusing on is having the content level be the same for all students at each grade level. And we feel that that's super important because we want to maintain the integrity of the program. So the teachers who have been teaching them reading or literacy, math, and IPC, those teachers will continue to be delivering the instruction for students, whether they're at home or at school. Students who are in school, they will be having recess with their peers. Those peers will be those students who are in those small cohorts already with them. And so they will just be in those still smaller groups, but they'll have an opportunity to be outside at recess with them. The other addition for students who are at school, they will, like I said, continue to be having that virtual instruction. But in addition to that, when there are breaks in their schedule, that's when they'll have their recess, that's when they'll be having lunch. They'll also be having some sort of additional morning meeting, just as kind of an opportunity to build community within the in-person group. And then also there'll be like read alouds and movement breaks and things built into their day. So those are kind of some of the similarities and differences between the two programs. Next slide. What this looks like. So teaching staff at school. So teachers, they're going to plan for students to learn with their grade level teachers. So that's what we want to keep. We really want to maintain that integrity of that program. So also what this is going to look like and what we found a lot of success with this week is that we have several teachers assigned to each cohort. And so with those cohorts being really small, we think we needed to have multiple teachers so that those teachers who are able to maintain their schedule. So if they have a math class that they're teaching, they may need to go into a separate classroom when they're all by themselves and be able to deliver that lesson to the students who are at home. Signing in for those lessons. And so since they're not able to be with that cohort throughout the day, there's multiple staff that are with that group. The thing that we want to emphasize is that group of teachers is just assigned to that group of students. So we're not increasing the risk of them exposing themselves to different cohorts of students. So although the class sizes are very small, there are also a lot of staff that are assigned to those cohorts in order to maintain the integrity of the program. All right, and Chuck, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, so thanks, Nyamka. So basically what's happening this next week, and we're just trying to refresh everybody, sort of the plan we laid out last town hall and even all the way back to the fall was, what are we going to do now? When are we going to be able to invite more people into the building? So we are going to be data analysts. We always are, but even more so, I think, to really understand what's working, what's not working. We're going to be looking at the data from the choose a schedule form. So 100% completion is critical. We're going to be looking at staff vaccination data and desire to return data. Same way we're asking our families, we're asking our staff their desire to return. And then obviously we're going to look at the data around student needs to prioritize, and we're going to be really having a lot of fruitful conversations with our teachers to gather even insights on how the socialization piece is going, which may not otherwise pop up in our sort of academic assessments. And then after this comprehensive review, the team is going to meet. We will figure out what's safe and what's logistically feasible for our community, how many people we can invite back, where we're going to fit them, how we're going to maintain those cohorts, how we're going to allow the teachers to continue to teaching the subject matters that they've already been teaching, etc. So what this means for you all, on starting March 12th and on the 15th, we're going to be contacting all the families that requested an at-school spot. We're going to tell them at that time whether or not we're able to offer you a spot. And if it's for one of your children or multiple of your children, we'll be able to tell you that kind of stuff then too. We will have better details of what the modes of learning look like, because we'll know which staff are going to be back. And we'll have a much better idea, at least for the March 29th launch of phase 2. And we'll tell families whether we're offering the sort of in-person classes or continuing remote classes at school with staff support. You'll have the option to accept or decline the offer. Again, declining the offer is always your choice, as is accepting. We will have to put a deadline on it because as I mentioned, it's going to be a rolling process. So if you decline the offer, that might open up a seat for somebody else who we haven't been able to get to. So that's what's coming next down the pipe for everybody. Just a quick sort of overview of why this is working and why so much planning has had to go in place. So let's talk a little bit about health and safety while at school. We've written a 100+ page plan of what it means to come back to school and what that looks like and how we're going to do it. We've had to run it up through the authorities, through OSSI and the Public Charter School Board. We've had outside experts come in and meet with our ops team to look at our protocols and give us recommendations and sign off on whether they meet the requirements of the CDC and of OSSI. But high-level ones that you all obviously need to hear and be reinforced, masks are going to be required. A daily health screening is going to be required before anybody's allowed in the building. In fact, they won't allow you on the Old Soldiers Homes campus unless you have a mask on your face as you're pulling up. So wear those masks, stop the spread. Social distancing will continue to be enforced. As I mentioned, there is a debate about the appropriate number of feet right now. It is still 6 feet apart, but there are some health experts that are saying 3 feet might be okay or 5 feet might be okay. Clearly, the less feet apart, the more desks you can fit in a building, the more students you can fit in a room, the more people we can provide in-person teaching to. Protocols for addressing possible and diagnosed case of COVID, those are mapped out. We know exactly what to happen if someone presents symptoms while they're at school. They may have been able to come in, but during the day, start running a fever, cough, whatever. We know exactly what to do, and we've all been trained on that. The way the ops team did it is they worked with all the city experts and the national experts to develop a plan. Then they trained our school leadership. Remember, we brought a lot of folks back in February in our staff to build that momentum. We also spent those 2 weeks training them on all these protocols. So then once the teachers come back, then the leadership can teach the teachers, and then the teachers can teach the kids on how to do this. So it's sort of a train the trainer model. And if you have, so please download the screening app if you have any intention of coming back into the building. Again, it's free, it's really straightforward. It's in English and in Spanish. You can always look at our guide for at-school learning, and if you have any questions too. This is something we're really excited about, which I think has allowed us to bring staff back and built that confidence. It's not mandatory that people have negative tests to work here, but it's strongly encouraged. And in order to make it as easy as possible, we do on-site Sentinel testing, we call it. It is currently offered to all staff and students who are in the building and anyone else in their households. So for example, it's usually every other Wednesday. Next Wednesday, myself and my 3 kids will get tested. Because that way I know if COVID's gotten back into my house or when any of my kids has picked it up. So we are not only limiting it to staff, but we're going to invite it to all of our community. We have an amazing partner in the Elaine Ellis Center of Health. They do a fantastic job. They show up, they run through 30 or 40 people in under an hour, and you get your test results emailed directly to you. We also are told what the results are too, just so we can do tracking and tracing. Sentinel Surveillance we've talked about, routine monitoring. We're constantly looking at all that so we know what's going on in our own community. You are only allowed to do the Sentinel testing or be on site if you're asymptomatic. If you're experiencing COVID-like symptoms, and that's part of the screener in the app, or if you don't do the app, we will ask you those questions before we let you into the building. You're not allowed in. It's just being extra cautious. Again, these are the regulations. The test we do is the PCR. It's the nasal swipe. It's not the rapid one. The nasal swipe is much more reliable. Typically, if there is a positive test with the rapid test, you have to go get the PCR afterwards to confirm it, because there's a lot more false negatives with the rapid test. But if a child is displaying symptoms here, our nurse can do a rapid test, and that gives us some information about whether or not they're testing positive. And if they are, then we can refer them to get a PCR test. If any of you are interested in doing the Sentinel testing, we do it on Wednesdays when there's no students in the building, when staff is in professional development. Let Heather Hesslink know, and she can explain to you all what the process is. So here's our closing thoughts, and then we're going to jump into your questions and hopefully have a really productive dialogue. I'm really grateful that you let Niamka and I talk at you for a while, and now we're excited about talking with you. We miss our children desperately, but we're so happy to have some here. We are doing everything we can to bring more back when it's safe and healthy, and to not increase the risk to anybody. And we are looking at the entire community, not just our staff, not just our students, but the whole community that is Creative Minds. We know both from personal experience, but also from conversations we've had with many of you, that this year has been one of the most difficult years in anybody's lives. None of us anticipated this. None of us signed in to do this kind of education, or signed up, excuse me. And many of us have been adversely impacted, lost family members, have caught COVID, have the long range symptoms, whatever the case may be, not been able to go out to eat, whatever the case may be. We appreciate how difficult that is. And that's why a lot of what we talk about is socio-emotional learning. It's dealing with that trauma. It's why we want to bring kids back into the building. We focus on that first and foremost, and academics will follow if our kids feel safe, if our families feel safe. You can't do the academics until people are safe. So just a reminder, any reopening decisions reflect the values we've been talking about throughout the year, and in particular reminded folks about today. And we are counting the days. We are super excited about next fall, when we expect things to be back to whatever normal is, when we can have kids in the building and teachers in the building and have those beautiful interactions that we used to have. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to turn it over to Craig, who will go through the questions in the chat. I haven't seen it because when I'm sharing screen, I can't see the chat. So, and we'll go from there and take your questions. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thanks, Chuck. We do have a couple questions. I've tried to group them as they come in. So there's some kind of forward looking and some that are more related to the immediate future. So we'll tackle those ones first, kind of more related to the immediate future. A few questions on Niamka, if you can expand on how teachers, are they going to be doing both, covering virtual and in person, or how they'll rotate? So maybe talk a bit to kind of teacher coverage and how that's envisioned to work.
Sure. Like I said, our priority is really to maintain the current schedule that we have. It's working really well in that the teachers are able to really think through and create really meaningful lessons for the students, and we don't want that to go away. What we do know is that if we have multiple teachers assigned to a classroom, that and how we're thinking about structuring that is so that there are times when they are scheduled to lead a lesson, and then the times where they're not leading the lesson, we still want to make sure they have some planning time. But then there'll be also opportunities where they may cover just the recess, so that the staff who's monitoring those classrooms, is helping students get on to their remote lessons and join their classes. But then the teachers who are delivering that instruction are still able to kind of go to a separate space to deliver the lesson through the virtual space. So it is a lot of, puzzle putting together, trying to figure out how that works. And that's why, getting this data as soon as we can so that our team can really look at one, who are the students who we need to bring back? Two, who are the teachers who are willing to be back, what grade levels they are. And then now that's where it comes in, where we're putting together, how can we put groups of students together along with teachers together so that we can maintain the teachers' current schedules. There might be some minor tweaks. And what I mean by that is maybe if there's a small group that this teacher was doing or an office hour, that may be another person on the team who is remaining in this virtual space, they may need to take up one of their office hours or one of their small group lessons. But for the most part, we want those groups to remain consistent.
Great.
Abby?
Yep, Abby, if you want to chime in.
Sure. One of the things that we really tried to do for these initial classes that we have open beginning this past week is work with the staff that was willing to come in to determine the best possible way to do it. And so it's going to look a little bit grade to grade depending on their roles and who's coming in. For example, in one of the classes right now, we have a lead ECE teacher with some teaching assistant and dedicated aid backups. And then in another class, we have two of our urban teachers covering. And so those two schedules look very different, but it's working with pretty minimal impact on the virtual schedule, which is one of our top priorities right now.
Let me just answer because I saw Amy had a follow-up question. So what that means, Amy, they won't be, so all the teachers will be assigned to a cohort. And so within that cohort, we're going to keep those numbers. So maybe there's like maybe 6 or 5 teachers assigned to a cohort or something like that. Those teachers will only interact with those students in that one cohort. So there'll be multiple teachers assigned to that so that they could come in and out, but it won't be like all of the teachers in the building who would be potentially interacting. We're really thoughtful about keeping all of the people who come into contact with a cohort of students super small.
Okay, thanks, Nyamka and Abby, for those answers. I'm going to go over to Chuck. If he can revisit, there was a question around what percentage or how will we know how many people will receive an invite to come back once we expand learning. And Chuck touched on that in one of the prior slides, but I'll ask him to recap that, please.
Sure. It's going to depend on how many staff are here. It's going to depend on the regulations, the CDC guidelines. So if we continue to have 6 feet apart and 12 people maximum in the classroom, that's already a rate limiting factor of how many people we can even have in a building, even if everybody wanted to be back, right? So what we are in the process, I can't say an exact percentage right now because we're still collecting data from you all. We're collecting data from our teachers. What we're seeing though is there's about a third of folks who want to come back no matter what the situation is, a third who will come back only if there's sort of like old school, like it was the way it used to be with their students, teachers and that kind of stuff, and a third who aren't comfortable coming back yet. We're seeing almost the same kind of rates with our staff. So none of this is surprising. So what the team will be doing, and when we reach out to you all, we will have crunched all these numbers. I really need 100% of folks to do the choose the schedule form so we don't leave anybody out. And we need to touch with 100% of our staff and see how they're feeling now that they're getting vaccinated, and maybe some of their kids are being allowed to go back at part-time or whatever the case may be. So I wish I could give a solid percentage, but as soon as we have that, we'll be able to share those numbers.
Okay, thanks for that, Chuck. I'm going to bounce back over to Nyamka. There was a good question around, especially for those families that are new to CMI. Will they have a chance to kind of come into the school and see the space or potentially meet who the children may be interacting with?
Sure. So one of our reflections, we actually had a preschooler who came in, who was invited with this first group and realized that, this was his first time in a building, and, being thoughtful around how we can make that experience go a little bit better. So our team is talking about how we can set up scheduled time slots for new families to come in and see the space. And then also, for that preschooler, it was really weird. Everyone had on masks, trying to help them feel welcome and kind of know what to expect. So there will be opportunities for those who are invited back for a space to have an opportunity to come in prior to that with their child so they can kind of see the space. But that will be on a, Heather's going to be on top of that, really managing how they're coming into the building, make sure we're tracking who's coming into the building, and make sure that we are staying within our limits of people in the building. So yes.
Great, thanks. And I'll stick with you for one more, Nyamka, around will those that are staying remote see a change in the daily schedule?
Our hope is that they will not see a change in the schedule. What might happen is that maybe someone who does an office hour, there might be someone who does a different office hour. Like there might be a teacher who, they might have an office hour with teacher A, they might have office hours with a different teacher at that time. If we're not able to make that switch, there might be a small change, but we're really not trying to disrupt that schedule. That's like the last thing that we really want to do.
All right, thanks for that. Back to you, Chuck, there was a two-part question around kind of caps or summarizing the schedule that DCPS has been on and that they've been back for a little while longer than CMI has been back, so why we're on a different schedule. And then the back end of that we'll tackle in a separate question a little later around kind of our plans for summer and looking forward. So if you can tackle the question around DCPS schedules versus CMIs.
Sure. So I have students in DCPS, so I've been dealing with their scheduling as well. I think it's important to understand when DCPS, quote unquote, reopened, they reopened to 400 kids out of 50,000 in the fall. It's grown to almost 9,000 at this point. The schedules vary from school to school to school. So I have 2 high schoolers and 1 middle schooler. One of my high schoolers goes to school for a half hour on Mondays for his AP literature course. He has to stay for the rest of the day to control tracking and tracing. So I think what our approach was to be a little more comprehensive, a little more thoughtful. So for example, the kids we brought back in phase 1 are here all 4 days of the week. They're here for the full school day. They're here for their schedule they've already grown accustomed to. And they're hearing the instruction from the teachers that we're teaching them virtually, right? So we tried to keep it consistent because that is better for kids. Another example from DCPS is I used to be in central office as a deputy chief for many years. One of my former employees, who is not a teacher, is teaching a 3rd grade class in elementary school in one of their care rooms, and she has 4 kids. So that sort of, what you hear in the paper is a lot different than actually what is happening. So that's that. So that's why CMI is sort of doing what is best for the CMI community. That's also sort of what DCPS defaulted to after the fall did not go very well. They made every single school come up with their own schedule and figure out which students should be coming back. So some schools have invited a large number of students back because their staff is willing to come back. In other schools, like Deal is a good example, very few of the teachers at Deal are willing to come back. So Deal has almost no kids going in there, except for super, super high need kids. So everybody's trying to do that balancing act. The other thing is, when I talked about political pressure, there was initially a lot of that political pressure. You need to follow what DCPS is doing and all that kind of stuff. But what we saw was, and this is my own personal observation, I'm not speaking for CMI, was the communication wasn't transparent and was more focused on sort of pyrrhic victories than it was on what's best for kids. And they've had to go back to what's best for kids, and hence the program is growing incredibly slowly. It's, less than 20% of the kids are back in place right now. Their summer programming at DCPS is only going to be for they've now gotten to the place where they've identified the kids who are struggling the most in their virtual programming. And so that's what's going to be offered. It's kind of like summer school, but it's not going to be exactly the same as the old summer school. So that's what they're going to be offering over the summer. And so it's not going to be everybody. What that means for us summer-wise is we're having conversations right now. And I also saw, I'm going to address another question about IEPs and ESY, that's extended school year programming. We're talking already right now about what our summer might look like. We're talking to partners and trying to develop some programming, again, to bring kids back if they want to come back. If we're able to create some opportunities to have people on campus to do some of that socio-emotional learning and be with some friends in a safe way, that's going to be a lot better when everybody's back in person mid-August, right? Versus not having been in the school all that time. So we're looking right now to figure all that out. We're doing a pretty deep dive. I saw Amita is on the call, our Director of Inclusion. We're doing a deep dive right now into our IEPs and the progress kids are making or not making. That's what informs who's invited back for ESY. We had a little over 30 kids last year who participated in ESY. It'd probably be a little higher this year, given some of the challenges our IEP kids have had accessing the content. But the other sort of difference, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining because I'm not, because we are so lucky to have such an amazing community of school leaders in the charter movement, but also here at CMI. But DCPS is getting 121 million extra dollars next year, and we're not. So maybe with some advocacy, we'll be able to get some additional money to support the changes we have to put in place, but that's just sort of the reality of the city right now. They have a direct line to the mayor. We go through the public charter school board. We don't necessarily have the mayor's ear. And these inequities have been in place since the charter movement started. And there's a lot of people who are putting in a lot of effort to try to balance the two and make sure there's fair funding. So the schedules can be closer. But the fundamental reason charter schools were started was because the DCPS system really wasn't serving kids well. And we thought we had better ideas and new ways to do it. You know, progressive education, there's not a lot of progressive education programming in DCPS, but we're able to do that more with charters. So I'll get off my charter soapbox, but that's sort of the high level picture of why we're not exactly tracking what Chancellor Farabee and the mayor and Deputy Mayor of Education, Paul Kine, are out there saying.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. I'll address one, then throw it over to Iep. One of the questions was, are all teaching staff or all staff now eligible for the vaccine? And as of Monday, yes. Prior to that, we had to submit names of staff who were working in the building or supporting students directly or expected to soon be supporting students directly. And we did do that for a number of our staff. But beginning Monday, any and all staff that are in a charter school are eligible to begin trying to get an appointment for the vaccine. So that is a shift that's just occurred. We were notified of it last week and it will start on Monday. So for you, Iep, that's a kind of a transition into a couple questions on, you know, what do we know right now about the number of teachers coming back into the building or willing to come back into the building?
Sure. So we're still collecting that information. We are excited that we do have some staff who are already in the building. We're up to, I believe right now for a whole school, I think it's 18 staff in the building for lower school and middle school, that total number. What we're doing right now is we've surveyed all the staff, but now we're doing kind of the personal calls and checking up with staff to kind of get more information around, you know, some staff identified that they would come back after they received the vaccination. So we're fortunate that, you know, now it's opened up to anyone who wants a vaccination in the charter school to be able to have that option available to them. And now it's following up with the staff to say, you know, are you still continuing to move forward with getting vaccinated? Have you been able to schedule an appointment? Where are you? Are you at the first, second appointment? So we're doing those calls because we really want to understand from our staff what are the things that are going to have them want to come back into the building. So we're still gathering that data. And that's going to be the big piece that helps us determine how many students we're able to kind of bring back into the building.
Great, thanks, Iep. Let's bring a new voice into the conversation, our fabulous middle school director, Ms. Dill, with a question around what the middle school kind of schedule or plan would be for students who are typically moving from classroom to classroom to take different subjects.
Good morning, everyone. So with this past week's experiences and getting the students back into the habit of coming into the building, we set up a programming schedule where students are in their specific cohorts. And so there is no moving from class to class. And moving forward, when we come back March 29th with additional bodies in the building, more teachers, more students, we will continue that programming. And it's set up for the students to be a part of one cohort with 2 teachers and a support personnel. So right now the numbers are supporting us having 3 adults in the room to maybe 6 to 7 students. Students will not move around. They will continue their classes on their iPads or Chromebooks, and we will make sure that we are able to contract trace and the schedules Heather has set up for the bathroom breaks, lunch breaks, everything is going smoothly, and we hope to continue that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dill. Let's continue with the new voice theme and bring in Heather Hesslink, our Director of Operations and Compliance. And there was a question before, Heather, around will students be able to bring their own lunches or will we serve lunches? So maybe talk to that and just generally the safety plan for meals.
Great. Well, good morning. When it comes to lunches or food, you actually have 2 options. Option A, you can bring food from home, whatever you'd like to bring, assuming you comply with the no nut rule that the school has. Option B, we partnered with a new food vendor called Top Spanish, and they will provide meals to your student, and they will also meet any dietary or allergy concerns that you may have. And the meals that are provided free of charge. So the cost to participate in school lunch is $0.00. And as a family, as part of the re-enrollment package, when you come for in-person, we ask you what your preference is, and you either opt in to receive school lunches every day or not. And the same goes for breakfast as well. We also provide breakfast if students are interested, free of charge every day. Regarding the general operation of the building, we have it set up that we actually start the whole mindset of how the school looks different with COVID with the re-enrollment forms. We've asked every staff member in the building, as well as every family in person, to sign a code of conduct. The Creative Minds Code of Conduct just basically reiterates and has every family affirm that they will follow the safety rules that we have in place for to keep the community safe inside the school. It does not dictate how you behave outside the school. It is strictly for the school hours. It mainly says you will wear a mask, you will do the daily screening, and things like that. Regarding the daily screening app, it was developed in-house. A couple of things about the app is it doesn't actually collect your personal information on an outside database. Everything resides in your phone, and then the phone wipes the data automatically every night at midnight. And so you start over. If you have any specific questions about the app, please feel free to reach out to me. I developed it with my son, who's a college student and has some coding experience. So if you have any questions about the app, I'm happy to discuss it with you. Other safety precautions we have in place is obviously we have the cohorts. We've devised the schedule so that there's minimum interaction between cohorts. So even in the hall, we follow the right-hand rule. And we've also got the schedule staggered so that classes on the 3rd floor, for example, they have bathrooms and they have recess and lunch times that give them free access to the hallway spaces or the community spaces. We try to use the hallways and the stairwells not as loitering points, but basically as egress to move where we need to move for the transitions. During normal times, the building is also set up. So for example, we have 2 stairwells. One stairwell is intended for going up and one stairwell is intended for going down to minimize exposure between cohorts.
Great, thanks, Heather. If you can follow up with one more, someone asked, would students be able to warm up their food if they bring it from home?
Unfortunately, no. Just like before, we do not have access for students for microwaves and things like that inside the building. So students would need to bring their lunches and hopefully store them in like a proper insulated container or in like a thermos. If they wanted, for example, soup heated up, they would bring it warm in a thermos and it would stay warm that way. The other option again is the Top Spanish meals. The food is hot lunch every day and it is stored and served at temperatures.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Heather. Niamka, I'm going to come back to you with a question on if we do transition to more kids in the building on a kind of a 2-day-a-week schedule, how will the creative care students who are currently coming 4 days a week kind of blend into that model?
Sure. We're still trying to work that out. What we found is that those students who we brought back for those 4 days are those students who really, really need that. And we would like to continue to have that 4-day option for them. So that's part of the consideration as we move forward with planning with bringing additional students into the building.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that, Niamka. I'll tackle one to throw a different voice in for a second before going back to Chuck with a question. Someone asked around if the PCR tests are gentle or invasive. I can tell you, and others can chime in, I know most on this call have done the tests. It is fairly gentle. It is not the kind that kind of goes up and touches your brain, I guess, for lack of a better example. It also depends on who you get, but they are not the ones that are inserted really, really far up. If anyone else wants to chime in with their experiences, I think Elaine Ellis has been great, and they're very, my kids had come in to do it as well, and they've been very gentle and caring with them. So they do a great job.
It does make my eyes water a little bit, but it's not painful.
Makes me want to sneeze, but I don't because.
Very good, very good. There was a question kind of around the number of DCPS folks who have tested positive so far in their situation. And I'll throw that over to Chuck in a second, but I can say from the testing that we've been doing so far of everyone, we've had 0% positivity rate of the folks that have come in to do our testing program. But Chuck, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about the comparison between DCPS and kind of what we expect.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that's happened at a lot of school districts. They will reopen, bring kids back, and then what typically happens, the research is showing schools aren't necessarily super spreader places, but people can bring it in from outside. So whatever the family circumstances might be, or someone catches it on the bus and that kind of stuff. So San Diego is a really good example because it's a big school district. In their second day, they had to basically send home 700 people because someone from outside brought it in and was positive, and they had touched or been around 700 people, right? So it was like across 7 schools or something like that. So it happened in multiple sites. But the point is, if someone tests positive, at least in our program, or we have concerns that someone's positive or they're symptomatic, that's why we do the tracking and tracing. That's why we know everybody who's in the building. That's why you do the CMI screener app, because then we know exactly who we have to tell to quarantine. And we follow the protocols from the Department of Health on when we notify people. We notify the city. We let them know. They do their own tracking and tracing as well. So it's all very, very controlled. The numbers, they don't necessarily, when DCPS, and I've tracked those numbers too, they don't report out how I think the number was 130 tested positive. They don't necessarily say where they contracted the virus. It's very not likely, given they're following similar protocols that we are, that it happened at school, but more likely it happened outside of school and was brought into school. And then the 88 that are quarantining of staff and the 181 are the folks that they came in contact with. Right? Because you do that to be extra safe. If you come in contact with someone, and that's one of the screening questions, you're supposed to quarantine. If you travel to one of the sort of high-risk states and you come back into the district, you're supposed to quarantine. So that's really what's happening, I think, in that situation. The follow-up question on that question from Mr. Y I see is, what's the protocol if we start seeing positive cases? That's why early on in the deck, and why we've always said, if there's a surge, then we might have to switch back to virtual. We're doing everything we can to avoid that. That's why we're being cautious, because that is more traumatic and difficult to have to go, everybody who's already back in person, go back to virtual. So we're trying to do everything we can to control that. We can't remove 100% of the risk, but we can mitigate the heck out of it. We can decrease it as much as possible. So.
Right. Okay, thanks, Chuck. We'll touch on 2 quick building questions. One was, do the windows in the building open? The answer is some of them do, not all of them. That is something we're taking a look at. We have been working with our general contractor to kind of get a handle on what would be required to open more of the windows, as it is a balancing act, given, of course, like most things in the building, the historic nature of the windows, and what's needed to actually get them functioning, given that they all operate on a very old kind of rope and pulley system. So we will need to look at that, and we are looking at that. Once we kind of come to a determination of what we're able to do, we'll certainly let folks know that. In the interim, however, as we've talked about on past calls, we did have an assessment done by SETI and Associates to kind of look at what the low-hanging fruit is, or ways we can immediately address air quality in the building. One of those, for folks that may not have heard before, is every room in every office has a UVC filter, air filter in it that cycles the air in and out of the room several times an hour. So that is one thing we've done, as well as, of course, following the safety protocols and cleaning within the room space. So those are ways we're addressing the air quality in the building. And then there was a question around the cleaning schedule of bathrooms in other areas. So Heather, maybe you can quickly touch on just what the cleaning schedule is for the different spaces.
Sure. So we have, anybody who was in the building last year, we actually have a new cleaning company that started on July 1st. The standards and expectations of just daily cleaning are much different than you're accustomed to. That was put in place as we put out our contract out to bid. The cleaning schedule, every night, all the classroom spaces are deep cleaned, and there's actually a checklist that verifies who physically did it and that the work was done. In addition, on Wednesdays, when we don't have students in the building, there's an enhanced cleaning, and every Friday night, when after the cleaning crew is done, like their physical cleaning, the building is electrostatically sprayed, and it basically kills anything in the air. And so once a week, that is done as a preventative measure. Somebody asked specifically about the bathrooms. So the bathrooms are actually cleaned multiple times during the day. They're not necessarily cleaned after each person uses it or each cohort uses it. However, they are deep cleaned every evening. In the morning, they are cleaned briefly before people come in to make sure that they are good to go from the night crew. And then bathrooms that are used by multiple cohorts are cleaned at least 2 times a day. And then obviously if there's a spill or an incident in the bathroom is cleaned again. The staff bathrooms and stuff are actually cleaned as well, at least once or twice a day. The bathrooms that are in the cohort classrooms, in order to minimize, like in the pre-K3, the bathroom is actually in the classroom, in order to minimize contact with people who are not in the direct small group. For example, the cleaning crew. I mean, if what we do is the cleaning crew actually comes in and cleans the space when they're out at recess in order to avoid direct interaction. So for example, the bathroom that's only used by one cohort during the day is cleaned very thoroughly at night. It's cleaned in the morning before the kids come, and then it's cleaned when they're out at recess in order to prevent exposure of multiple people. One of the ways we're working really hard to make sure that everybody is safe is trying to minimize interactions with people who are not in your small group.
Okay, thank you for that, Heather. I'm going to jump back to Nyamka. There was a clarification question asked around kind of the numbers and the math, which is why I'm handing it back to Nyamka, who's much better at math than I am, to kind of tackle what that looks like from a cohort size and the planning behind how many teachers against how many students.
Sure. So when we say teachers, we're thinking about lead teachers, inclusion teachers, teaching assistants, dedicated aid. All of those are included in our kind of teachers. And so it's hard to kind of give you exact number, like if there's 18 teachers, we can bring back this many students. Back to what Abby was saying is that we have to be really thoughtful about what those teachers are currently doing, what their schedule looks like, because we don't want to disrupt that. So there may be, like I said, this number keeps popping up, 5 or 6 teachers that are assigned to one cohort, and one class. And so in that, like I said, we want to keep the amount of interaction that staff have with a cohort of students pretty small. So it's hard to say exactly if we have this many staff, this is how many students. It's really going to be contingent on, are they dedicated aides? Are they teaching assistants? Are they inclusion teachers? Are they lead teachers? So all of those things, that's a piece of the puzzle that we'll be actively working on sorting through next week as we follow up with teachers and having those personal calls with teachers to kind of get some insight on what their comfort level is. When will you be able to come in? When will you have your vaccine? What those kind of numbers are.
Okay, thanks, Nyamka. There was a question around students potentially being fearful of returning in the fall and the emotional concerns there and the strain on them. So, I think Nyamka and I can kind of tag team that one. As we've touched on earlier, certainly for folks that are coming back now that have never been to the building, would want to try to offer them an opportunity to come in and see the building. As Chuck talked to kind of over the summer, we're exploring ways to get folks onto campus through different activities and opportunities to kind of get reacclimated to being in that groove. And then Nyamka, if you want to kind of address what the instructional team's thoughts are on making that an easier transition for kids and the supports we'll have available.
Sure. So Abby, Lauren, and I have been talking with our student wellness team and really starting to push them to kind of think about what this looks like, because we realize that some of our students may not have been in our building for over almost a year and a half if we, coming back in that August time, and realize that there's a lot of relearning what school looks like. It's not, it's not even going to be like what it looked like before, but like being really thoughtful around how do we support students in helping with that transition. A couple of things that we've kind of already identified is like doing a video walkthrough of what the building looks like with these, safety protocols in person, like staying 6 feet, seeing the signs on the floor. What does that look like in our classroom? Having these small bins, it's not, we don't line up as we typically did before. Sending that information home over the summer, that's, part of that. But then also creating kind of opportunities for students to ask questions, like ask the teacher or ask the administrator, like what are the things that are causing them some anxiety or fear, and kind of having conversations around them. I know community meetings are highly subscribed, so thinking about what opportunities we have to in those moments to talk about like what it looks like coming back to the school, getting them excited, but then also like reminding them that we have to do things a little bit differently this year, and it's okay. Leaning on our personal goals, like how we have to be adaptable, and what are the things that we can do to ensure that students feel safe, because we can't just force them to come back in. We have to ensure that we are being responsive to their needs and what they need to feel comfortable, because we want them to be available for learning, and know that's not going to happen if they're not feeling comfortable. So on our student wellness team, we have our social worker, our behavior counselor, and our behavior coaches. So lots of people who are going to be working to be thoughtful around how we can successfully transition students back and answer any questions that they have, and also any fears or anxieties that they have. Another thing that I was talking with another colleague is that the students also pick up on our anxiety and fears. So I just want to also kind of cautious how you kind of are talking around schools. Like we want to continue to let them know that there's safety precautions in place, but we also want to ensure that we are not that how we describe what school is going to look like, we're doing it in a way that's developmentally appropriate. And we'll be sharing some resources with you, and also having kind of follow-up workshops on what that looks like, because we know it's not going to be like one thing and that's going to like fix everything. It's going to be part of our communication and ongoing that we're going to be providing from now until we come back into school.
Great, thanks very much. Only a few more questions in the queue, so we will be tackling those. If you have additional questions, please drop them in now. And thanks, Felicity. The one that you just dropped in was one that we're going to tackle. So I'll put it over to Chuck to kind of talk a little more about plans for the fall, and expanding on what we may expect by saying full time, as well as the potential schedule for next year.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, we're all trying to look into that crystal ball. What's the fall going to look like? I think across the sort of industry of education, folks are really optimistic that we're going to get back in person in the fall. What that means, and there were some questions about what does the CDC have to say in order for that to happen? It means that they'll have to basically lift most of the restrictions just based on space and logistics, right? As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a pretty heated debate going on with the doctors and the folks who track disease and educators about what the appropriate distance is right now. Is it 6 feet, 5 feet, or 3 feet? If it's 5 feet, you can get more kids in a building. If it's 3 feet, you can get more kids in the building. Does it have to be 12 people in a classroom, or can you go up to 15? Some jurisdictions have restaurants allowed to be in full time and folks are eating there without masks, and other places say 25% capacity. So what would be ideal is we get the herd immunity in place. Everybody who needs a vaccine gets vaccinated. We've taken care of this like anxiety, because that's really, really real, I think, for a lot of families, for a lot of staff, about going back and having contact and all that. We work on building that confidence over the next 6 months. I still am optimistic we'll be back in a full-time schedule in person. We are talking, though, there is a possibility we may have families that still aren't comfortable, and who knows, maybe we keep a virtual strand. These are the conversations we're having now to plan for the fall. So what we're hoping to do, and Maggie, I appreciate it. I'm getting there. Maggie. We have to meet our 180 days. So that sort of mandates how long your school year has to be. We are looking for the same sort of start date that we had before. I think we're talking the second week in August, the exact date. Who has the exact date handy?
August 30th, 31st.
Oh yeah, just before Labor Day. That's right. August 31st, but bringing staff back 2 weeks before, or maybe a week before for professional development like we always do. And then running till June like we always do. We've tried very hard to keep the schedule consistent with what folks are comfortable with, again, to minimize that anxiety and to build some normalcy in people's lives. And was there another question around scheduling? You're all good, Maggie. I'm just teasing. You don't have to apologize. I appreciate it. There's a lot of questions, and sometimes we group them together, and Craig does a great job of making sure everybody gets their question asked. So.
Yep. Okay, that's all the questions. And just quickly expanding on Chuck's answer, there's kind of a lot of these artificial requirements right now around bathrooms and how spaced out bathrooms have to be and how many you can use. So that's all a big part of this. Thank you, Nina. One more question just trickled in. Has the curriculum this year been the same as a typical year, or has some been cut since we're virtual? So maybe Niamh, if you want to talk to kind of what how we've approached the curriculum of what it would have been during a normal in-person year versus what we're covering now.
Yeah, so we have kept the curriculum the same, like the same scope and sequence. The amount of time that teachers have been able to spend on them has been decreased. Like, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you by any means, because we're not having students in person to deliver that instruction how we typically do, the number of hours. So from that perspective, the curriculum has remained the same. However, the intensity or deep dive that teachers have been able to do into each and every standard, that looks a little bit different. And that's part of the information gathering that we've been doing as teachers have been, going throughout this school year, and something that we're continuing to monitor. I'll just kind of throw this out there also, is that I think that's an understanding across the board. They recently, OSCE has requested a waiver for state assessments because they realize this year is not a typical year. And although we are proud of the program that we put in place, we realize that it does not duplicate what we were able to do when we were in person. And so, I think with that framework, I think everyone realizes that we are going to be looking at what students have, learned over this year, with the idea that with whatever needs to be in place to support students to kind of get where they need to, we will continue to support them where they are.
Okay, with that, that is the end of the questions that we have lined up. Very last call here in the next 5 seconds or so, depending on how quickly you can type. If you have a question, drop it in. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Chuck to kind of wrap us up.
And obviously, after reflecting a little bit, and if you have questions, just let us know. We will post the answers. We're putting all the questions and answers on the website, so you can always go back there and revisit that. We're constantly taking questions from families during the week. I think the critical piece here is we're doing everything we can to try to be as open and honest with you guys, and let you know what we know and what we don't know. And we want you to do the same thing for us. That way, with that transparent communication, we're all in it together. We're all going to come out of it together. We're all going to be stronger at the end. Our kids are resilient, and they're beautiful, and they're brilliant, and they're going to be wonderful human beings when they grow up. Probably even better than us, because they survived something like this. So I'm optimistic. I'm grateful for you all. Again, reach out if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And take care. Get outside. Get some vitamin D today if you can. I'm going to run around outside for a little bit myself, I think. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good afternoon.